Hi, I'm Hilary Russo. Thanks for joining me for the HIListically Speaking podcast. I'm a certified holistic health coach and Havening Techniques practitioner, lover of great conversation, and of course, clever wordplay, HIListically speaking. So welcome to an empowering place where my guests share their transformational stories of trauma to triumph through health, healing, and humor. It's the ultimate brain candy as we find out who we are, how we got that way, and what it takes to be a happy and healthy grown-up. And be kind to your mind. I'm glad you're here. Disability doesn't mean inability. My dad has been gone almost 20 years now, and for some reason, those words are still fresh in my mind as if he said them to me yesterday. And they were words he said often. You see, what you may not know about me is that for the first 30 years of my life, I was surrounded by a disabled father battling diabetes and then some. And while I watched his health deteriorate over time, what never failed was his will to live or his sense of humor. On HIListically Speaking, my guests share their trauma to triumph stories week after week. But this time, we're doing something different. I'm passing the podcast torch over to Gustavo Serafini. Gustavo hosts the successful podcast Enabled Disabled. He understands disability firsthand. But on one episode, he took a different approach and a chance when he held space for me to share the other side of living with a disability, from a daughter's eyes and heart. So in honor of my dad and the many others out there who may be facing their own disabilities, who are unfixed but far from broken, as filmmaker Kim Warner shared with us in episode 61, and to the supporters who are right there holding hands to take those steps too, even when one step feels like a mile. This one's for you.
Welcome to the Enabled Disabled podcast. I'm your host, Gustavo Serafini. I was born with a rare physical disability called PFFD. My journey has been about self-acceptance, persistence, and adaptation. On the show, we'll explore how people experience disability, how the stories we tell ourselves can both enable and disable, how vulnerability is the foundation for strength, and why people with disabilities can contribute more than we imagine. I hope that leaders, companies, clinicians, families, and friends will better understand our capacity to contribute to the world and help enable us to improve it. Hilary Russo is a certified health coach, award-winning television journalist, professor, and host of the HIListically Speaking podcast. Hilary and I talk about growing up with a father who had a disability and how it shaped the way she experienced the world. Hilary was also courageous enough to share her own journey of chronic pain and her path towards a more holistic life. We also discuss Hilary's practice as a health coach and the different tools she uses to help her clients transform their traumas into triumphs. If you're enjoying the show and want to help us be sustainable for the long run, the best thing you can do is share the podcast with one other person you think will enjoy it. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the show. Hilary, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
It is such a pleasure to share the space with you, Gustavo. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I feel the same way. So I would like to get started with, you have a very interesting story growing up. Your father had a disability. And if you just tell us a little bit about what was it like growing up with him? What were some of the things that you learned from him that you think maybe you wouldn't have learned otherwise? What are some moments in your childhood that you remember that really stood out to you?
Absolutely. And I appreciate you giving me a chance to share this story because this does go back quite a ways. My father was diabetic and really battled his health his entire life. He was actually on the journey to become a professional baseball player. He played minor league and
found out he was diabetic when he was still a teenager. And, back then you make choices because you realize you need to take care of a family or you have to make a career happen for yourself. So, my dad wound up going to school and still had a really thriving law career. But in my youth, I only knew a father who was diabetic, and in the early years, I saw a father who didn't really take care of himself. I didn't know much about that being a child. You eat what your parents give you. You you do what you're supposed to do. But as I got older, and it wasn't too much, I was still in my youth, that I noticed my father's health was ailing, and it was suffering because my father did not take care of himself. He was an Italian. He loved his pasta. He loved his meatballs and his sausage and all the things that Italians love. But these were really hurting his health and well-being. And there is a link, obviously, between the emotional and the physical when we're not taking care of ourselves. It's why I do the work I do in holistic health. So I saw my father really kind of whittle away piece by piece. And I mean that literally and figuratively, because first it was a toe, then it was another toe, then it was a foot, then it was a leg. This is really traumatic for a child, as you can imagine, and traumatic for my father as well. But I witnessed a lot of maladies and medical conditions with my dad, from dialysis to in and out of hospitals, and doing my homework in the waiting room of hospital rooms here in New York. And it was quite heavy for me, because my dad also wasn't able to be present at a lot of things that I was a part of. Not that he didn't want to, but because his health didn't allow him to. And that was really difficult for me to endure. And it brought about a lot of panic. It brought about a lot of anxiety, because I was always wondering if my dad was going to be there the next day, which is a really heavy amount of information for a child to process,
Absolutely. Your parents are supposed to be the rock and the foundation for you, and to have that kind of taken away piece by piece, little by little, that has to be really difficult. That's not an easy thing to do. Was his diabetes something that then he could have controlled? He could have taken, there was enough there to where he could have taken care of it at the time? Or was it something that was really, he was still figuring it out, or he didn't want to?
Well, I think there's a stage of denial a lot of times with people who find out that they have a condition that they never lived with prior. And I see that more and more now, especially as a holistic health coach and someone who works regularly with clients who have been told, hey, you have diabetes, change your diet. And that's really a lot of information to throw at somebody when they've been living a certain way. And then suddenly they have to change the entire trajectory of how they've been living needs to change so they can manage something. And I imagine, I was young at the time, seeing my father's habits change did not really happen until, from what I recall and what I remember, my dad lost a very close friend to a heart attack, and he was only 40 years old. And I remember when that loss happened, my dad started to make changes. But at that point, there had already been an amputation. There had already been, the loss of vision, starting to the deterioration of vision in one eye. And you can't kind of go back, but you can certainly do things to turn around your health. I think we know so much more about holistic health and healing, and how we are able to do that now with the foods we eat, our mindset. And I don't know if he was ready and willing at that point in time. So if he had made different decisions, I'm sure it could have been helpful. His dietary ways. Obviously, there's a lot of science out there about how diabetes comes about and skipping generations. I'm really mindful of my own health because of it as well. But I don't know if it could have been completely avoided, but I do believe with the right kind of diet and exercise and being in a much more positive, mindful state, which my dad was, by the way. I mean, he always said, disability does not mean inability. I remember you and I talking at an earlier point where you caught on to that. And it's so true. He always used to tell me, just because you have a disability does not mean you are unable of doing something. I mean, his head was there. He was smart as sharp as a tack, and had a successful career until he passed. So I think he just wasn't making the best choices, and that hindered his health, and it did going forward. And then when he did see that friend pass, he made different choices. He cut his amount of carbohydrates. He was exercising regularly, and that did improve his health. But there was already damage done to his health already, So because the heart is very important with diabetics, as we know, a lot of them have heart issues later, and a heart attack, which is how I lost my father, is quite common.
Yeah, that's certainly difficult. And I think my experience is different. Having been born with a disability, there was almost like, I guess there's always a choice, but it seemed like for me, it didn't really feel like a choice. It was like, if you want to do something, this is what you need to do to get there. So either embrace that, what you need to do, or don't do it. But the mind state still needs to be there, and like the internal attitude to want something still needs to be there. So it's complicated, but it sounds like at least he had his mind in a place where he was still fighting through it, trying to make it work. Right. It just
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen my father get frustrated. Don't get me wrong. I've seen him in a state of frustration when he would be putting his prosthesis on, or, had tripped, or just I remember a number of little things that are coming up in my mind now that maybe I haven't thought of. I mean, my dad's been gone almost 20 years, but I do recall a number of occasions where my dad did find a frustration in the moment because of being an amputee. And I'm sure there were things that my father did not share with me that mentally he was going through. I know that just from witnessing, just any tension that might have been in the home, and, having a really supportive mother too, who was always there. I'm sure it was heavy on my mom as well. It's a lot to take on when you are with somebody who needs additional support on a both physical and emotional level. So I was just a kid surrounded by it. But I recall, Gustavo, one time, and this story is just so clear to me. I was sent away to summer camp for 8 weeks. I think I was probably around 11 or 12. And I think my parents just wanted to give me a break from everything that was there and be a kid and not worry. Because I was always that kid that would flock to my dad and want to nurture and want to help him. And that wasn't my responsibility. It wouldn't even be my responsibility as an adult, but I did that. And it's one of the reasons why I went to college away too. They wanted me to be a kid, be around normal things and not have to worry so much. But worry was such a part of my life. My dad used to call me a worry wart. It was funny. And I went away to camp, and I remember my parents were going to come and visit me at the halfway mark, that parents' weekend. And a lot of that camp could have been much more enjoyable if I was not in a stressful, worried, anxiety state of, Dad, did you take your medicine? Dad, please be here at 1:00. Don't be late. I mean, I was just taking on responsibilities that were not mine to take on. For an 11 or 12-year-old to be writing on the postcards that were sent home, because back then it was all postcards, saying, please remind Daddy please remind Daddy to take his medicine. Who am I to be saying that to my dad, who has been on the planet longer than I have? But that's how worried I was. And I didn't have the mental tools to know how to grasp my father's illness at that time until I was much older. And it was a lot of weight to carry, but it also created a sense of compassion and empathy that I was around and witnessed more of because I had a father who was disabled. And what's really beautiful about that is that it caused me to want to do more philanthropic work. As a kid, I was volunteering with my mom at children's hospitals where I saw children that were missing limbs or had cleft palates or some kind of disability or cystic fibrosis or whatever brought them to that hospital. I was there and I witnessed and I noticed that they were just being kids. They didn't know any different. And it really empowered me. And maybe that's part of what brought me to wanting to do the kind of work I do, right down to working in equestrian therapy too, where I volunteer with children who have special needs and they do their occupational therapy on horses.
Interesting. Can you talk more about that? I'm not,
Yeah.
I've heard a little bit about that, like with, military people who come back and they have some PTSD and there's, just being around the horses and doing that therapy helps them heal and find themselves again. So how does that work with the children?
There is such an attachment between equines, horses, and humans. Just like they say, there's a similar attachment with dolphins and humans. There is an unbelievable connection. And I've been around horses my whole life. I used to ride. I had a horse. And I think I noticed that connection at a very early age. And it's a respect. It's like two heartbeats is one. And I got into it, believe it or not, in New York City when I was living in Manhattan, the island of Manhattan. There are actually still a number of therapeutic horseback riding facilities that are in the boroughs. And I volunteered. I wanted to volunteer. And what we would do, it was Gallup NYC. And they're all over the country. I'm sure they're all over the world too, but it was a therapeutic horseback riding program where children from the city who were special needs, many different kinds of special needs that they had, did some of their occupational therapy while riding the horses. And I was one of the lead walkers and side walkers. So I would walk the horse. I'd walk in front or I'd be on the side because there's two side walkers, one on either side of the child. And during this time, they would do some of their sensory therapy or their occupational therapy in some sense. And some of these children were not even audible. And by the end of like a 14-week program, they were making noises in basically like telling the horse to trot or walk or stop. There are certain commands. And the horses, these are older horses. These are horses that have seen their day. And now they're just kind of like, I just want to retire. So they're very chill horses. And it was beautiful to see this because there is a motion. There's a calming motion. If you're ever in a car and you fall asleep, we rock ourselves to sleep. I talk about this a lot with my clients. We tend to do this because it's a calming motion. So when your mother rocks you in her arms, or you're in a car and you fall asleep, or you're riding on a horse at a slow pace, these things calm the brain. So I'm sure there's a direct relation between that and how that occupational therapy can work, and also taking certain commands. But it was so beautiful to work with them. And I'm looking for another location where I am now, because now that we are slowly seeing the world open, I would love to get involved with that again, because it brought me such joy to see how the children reacted and the adults as well. I just predominantly worked with children when I was volunteering.
That's amazing. I guess I'm not like, I'm a big dog person. I've always had a connection with dogs, but I've never had that connection with a horse. And I do know people who love horses who do say that there's a pretty powerful bond that can form between a person. I guess it's just how do the horses show, the emotion? How do they feel back and transmit that to the kids?
Oh boy, I wish I knew the answer to that, because to be in the mind of any animal would be quite amazing. I mean, I look at my kitty all the time, my 15-year-old Calico, who has a mind of her own for sure. But when she's sitting there purring in my lap or talking to me and meowing, I wonder what she's saying. I think animals are just amazing. And the connection between humans and animals is just so spectacular. I think it's an unconditional love, and there's an energy and an unbelievable shared energy that sometimes words don't need to be said, right? So I don't know if I have answers to how horses respond, but I know that they nuzzle and they are just warm creatures. And when you talk to something softly, it responds softly. And I've always noticed, just being around horses, as with my cat too, like I can tell, I always say she's like the litmus test of stress, because if there's any heightened voices or anything or any energy that doesn't feel right, she is out of here, like just out of here. So if we just respond, if we notice the response to animals and how we are acting, they sense the energy more than anything. And there's a calming nature. It's like an ebb and flow. So I imagine that has something to do with it.
Interesting. I also want to talk I think it's amazing that you had these challenging experiences as a child, and the way you responded is amazing, with empathy, with surrounding yourself in those communities even more, volunteering. For me, when I went to the doctor, and there was a bunch of people, and I saw other kids there and the hospitals, the only thing I wanted to do is I wanted to get out of there, and I wanted to go back to my life. And I didn't know, growing up, anybody else with a disability. It was like my quote unquote normal life, where I was pretending to be or trying to be like everyone else. And then there was the medical side, which I have to do it periodically because I have to do it. I never embraced, that community until a few years ago. And I did some volunteer work as well in the 90s, but it took a long time for me to embrace the community and to want to get to know other people with disabilities and to talk about it openly. It was always a separation for me. So I think it's kudos to you. It's marvelous that you were able to, even within that trauma, that difficulty, to just actually embrace it and go deeper into it.
I appreciate that. And I say kudos to you as well for coming so far and being where you are. But I got to be honest, Gustavo, you were the kid I wanted to play with when I was at those places where the children were in need of additional attention. So I have a story that just sits with me to this day. I must have been maybe about 8 or 9. And my mom and I used to go to the children's hospitals, and we give goat cart rides. We had a goat, Kipper. He was the sweetest thing ever. And kids loved to be around him. And he was the sweetest animal, Nubian goat. But my mom taught him how to pull a cart. And we would go to different places and do goat cart rides for festivals, like small festivals. I mean, nothing to scare the goat, but he loved children. And I remember we were at Lythedale Children's Hospital in Westchester County, New York, one time. And there was a little boy who was so full of laughter, and he had no arms, and he was just tossing a ball back and forth with me with his feet, like he didn't have a care in the world. And that image is still in my mind to this day. And it resonates with me so deeply because joy was there no matter what. Yep. And I think that moment might have been one of those moments that changed me, because it taught me more about empathy and compassion and resonance, being in the heart of the other person. And I'm grateful for the challenges I've been through. I think everything does happen for a reason. And I don't look back on anything thinking I wish it was done differently, because it was done the way it was done because it's the way it was done,
Well, it's incredible that you were able to, just connect like that, right? To hold space for that person and to see them as a human being and not, not looking past, but you just saw them as them, their joy, their in play and connection and in that moment. So that's fantastic. And I think that's where I had really good friends growing up. And I think that's why I've always cherished friendship so much, because you hold that space for each other and you see each other as fellow humans, and not, oh, well, this person is, has this status, or this person does this for me. It's not about that. It's a deeper human connection and holding space for each other.
That's what it's all about. It's really holding space for each other. It's all about love and listening, actively listening. And I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, we're all here. We all, what is it? Ram Dass says, we're all trying to find our way home, and we're all connected. And the moment we come to an awareness of that is when I think things change in our own lives. And I can't say that moment when I was a little one tossing a ball back and forth with that child, that changed me for good. I think it was years of different trials and tribulations. I mean, as I always say, your traumas are your triumphs, right? Our mess is our message. And I think it took time, and little things that occurred along the way have brought me to where I am today in that state of awareness that you have that shift in your life. They say we have a shift, maybe many, and it's where I want to be, serving others. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about some of those additional shifts as you were getting older and going through your teenage years. Like, what were some of those other key challenges and things that happened that helped you become the person you are today?
I think one of the biggest challenges I faced was going through major surgery at a relatively young age. I had temporomandibular joint syndrome, or disorder rather, TMJ, and went through 4.5 years of braces, wore the retainers, lost a few in the garbage, wore the mouth guard. I mean, I did it all. You look at my mouth, it probably looked like I could probably get every cable channel you had with the amount of metal I had in my mouth. And but I had a lot of pain, and TMJ was extremely painful for me because I had a malocclusion, an underbite that was pretty significant. And when I was 15, it was brought to my attention by my orthodontist, we might want to look into surgery. And I hear that, and I'm like, I've never been through surgery before. I mean, I had my tonsils out, but everybody had that, right? And this would require breaking my jaw, wiring it shut, or setting it back, then wiring it shut for 8 weeks. And that's just the beginning of the healing, because then I had to do a reduction surgery the next year, a tongue reduction surgery, actually, the following year, because your tongue is a muscle, and they were saying that it was too big for the space in my mouth. I mean, a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old at the time hearing this, it's like mind blowing, right? But I think the scariest part of that was it had to be my decision. My mom and dad couldn't make that decision. And I remember my orthodontist, Dr. Mike Rudolph, who I love to this day, telling me, Hilary, this has to be your choice. Nobody's going to make it for you. You can do it or you don't do it. And I said, let's do it. And it was under, with my orthodontist by my side, but also I went to like a maxillofacial doctor for the whole procedure. It was extremely painful recovery-wise, not to scare people, but that was my experience with it. And you're healing bone in your face. So there's going to be a lot of things going on in your emotional state as well as your physical. But, and I was laid up for 8 weeks. I was homeschooled before homeschooling was trendy, especially this year. And I was, there was no cable, no internet. I was basically homebound to my room with my thoughts. And it was really a difficult time because to really share this, to be transparent, I had to wear wire cutters around my neck just in case anything hindered me from, like if I, had to throw up and I was going to swallow it. It was basically break glass in case of emergency, right? So that in itself was traumatic, to wear these scissors around my neck, wire cutters, and then just be always fearful of, am I going to have to break glass, right? So that was a rather traumatic 8 weeks. And my face, I mean, being a 15-year-old, and I just wrote about this the other day, being a 15-year-old where appearance is so important to us, and it's always about being accepted. And then suddenly you look so different. The swelling, I used to say I looked like the Elephant Man. It was unbelievable swelling. I hope there's no pictures out there, but if there were, at this point in my life, I'm like, whatever, bring it on. It's part of my journey. Back then, I would have been mortified if anyone took a picture. But that process, that 8 weeks, and while I had this beautiful bite after, it did relapse a little bit, and I was looking at the possibility of having it redone because I had it so early. My body was still growing. That's why there was somewhat of a relapse and a little bit of pain coming back that I still deal with to this day a little bit because it is what it is. But I realized that I can control this level of pain. And some of it was not just physical. And when I realized that I had the power to manage it without medication, something really different happened in my life because I don't think I was in the right mindset then. I didn't have the tools then. I didn't really go through a rehabilitation process then. And now I understand where it's coming from. It's why I work so closely with people that are in pain management and chronic pain, because I understand what it feels like. And I understand how important having control of your thoughts can really change the level of pain you feel,
So so if we rewind for a second, because
Yeah.
I think there's two interesting parts there is, so back then you made the decision to do it. Were you aware I'm sure they warned you, like there is going to be pain, there is going to be this healing process, and you were just kind of like, I need to do it. And you, how did you make that decision in your head?
Because the pain in the moment would be temporary to the lifetime of pain that I would feel having these joints on the side of my jaw, these little olive joints that were causing clicking and lockjaw and pain. I knew the short-term pain would definitely outweigh the long term if I didn't have it. Does that make sense?
It does.
And not knowing, we didn't know. This is a surgery that was relatively new at the time I had it back in the 80s. Now it's much shorter. Now, I don't know if you're even wired shut that long. I don't even know if they wire you shut anymore. I don't know. They might do like really heavy rubber bands. I know that my surgery was very long. I was in there for hours and the recovery took longer. And I was like, the best part about it was, quite frankly, is that I had more chocolate shakes than I could possibly ask for because the calories I needed to heal. And and at that point I was like, I just want a Diet Coke and I'm just going to puree my soup. And my mom's like, no, we must get you more calories. I never want to see another Ensure in my life. Sorry. But I would say that I was kind of encouraged to get more calories in my body when as a teenager, we're always about appearance and looking our best. So there was a lot of psychological side to that too. Absolutely. I don't regret it by any means. It was something that was necessary and I made a very powerful decision as a teenager. And it led me to making more decisions and realizing I have the power to make choices on my own. And but it did. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I was going to say it did lead to, and there was pain throughout my adult life. And it wasn't until later that I really understood what tools I needed to really manage it better.
Yeah. So as you were healing in this process as a teenager, what did you rely on it to get through it? And then let's transition into what you learned about pain management and how it inspired and drew you towards what you're doing now.
Gosh, that is something I've never thought about. What did I do in the moment? Well, I think at that time, and I don't have one anymore, but back then I did have a TV in my room. So I'm sure I was watching a lot of television, a lot of whatever a teenager watches back then. But I was also, I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot of poetry. I just actually found my poetry books recently. So writing has always been a therapy for me. And, then becoming a journalist didn't seem it was very much of a stretch, right? So I was writing a lot, doing a lot of poetry, songs, just journaling. I journaled a lot. So that's always been a part of my life. And I think that's a big part of mental health support, is being able to write out your thoughts and just share, even if it's just with yourself. Putting it on in black and white can make a big difference. So that was a big part of it, because I didn't have a lot of visitors back then. I did not want people to come see me. I think I had 2 or 3 of my closest, dearest friends who are still very close to me today come and visit. But that was about it. I just did not want to, I just wanted to get through it. And I was very tenacious about it. And it was a lot of Hilary spending time alone, somebody who was like a social teenager, couldn't play my sports, was off the team for a year because they were worried that something would hit my jaw, which actually did when I went against the rules and went back to gym class and got hit in the face with a volleyball like a week after I returned to school. I was freaking out, but nothing happened from that. But I was like, okay, maybe I stay away from sports for a little while. But as a social teenager, going into a state of kind of solitude where the only people around me were like my mom and my dad and my tutor, that was it, So it was really Hilary learning to spend time with Hilary.
Which is most teenagers don't get to do that. So that's another learning experience to be able
Absolutely.
to. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't journal at that age, but definitely journaling is I've used it in many parts of my life, and it's helped me tremendously, because you don't always like Seth Godin says, right? Like he does his blog because it helps him clear his thinking. And so just putting your thoughts on paper, like it just clears your brain and solidifies the way you're thinking about things at the time. It's hugely important.
Yeah. And I think people get a misconception sometimes about journaling, because we go back to kind of that Dear Diary thought process. And I encourage my clients, I encourage my friends and family, whenever they have a little blockage or something's just not connecting with them, I'm like, write it down, just write it out. Even if you throw it away after, there's really power in that. And I love seeing, I do it myself. I send out an email once or twice a week, and I know that's part of my therapy. I'm sharing things I'm doing and sharing about my podcast, sharing a tip or a tool that people can use for their emotional well-being. But I know part of that is helping me in my own healing, and on my journey, and probably building something towards my book as well. So it's always an opportunity to get it out there. So don't necessarily think about it as journaling means I'm writing a Dear Diary. Think about it as you're putting your thoughts in order, or maybe it is our intuition. If you just sit back in silence for a moment and hold space for the question, the answers come. And sometimes that even happens just in that moment of clarity, of just being quiet, and then just let the pen do the work, because it really is, it's coming from you, nowhere else,
Absolutely. I learned a lot of that with meditation too, of when you're not holding the space for yourself, like the answers are there, but you're avoiding it. You don't want it. You don't want to deal with it. So it just kind of keeps bothering you. But when you sit in that quiet, or like for me, swimming now is like a meditation. I'm just in there in the water, and it's all just, it starts to come out and flow out of me. And it gives me so much more calm, so much more positive energy, right? Journaling and then transferring it on paper is just solidifying it in your mind.
Yeah. You're in the now. It's what I call a pleasant distraction. And we've talked about this. When we have these pleasant distractions in our lives, go to that place. And those are your places of joy. And when you're in it, when you're swimming, you're not thinking about anything, but just being, right? You're just being. It's the most beautiful place to just be. But in those moments where we are outside of that being and we are anxious or feeling stress or feeling pain or whatever the emotion or feeling is, when we take our mind to those places of being that we enjoy, the swimming, the ocean, being with your family, whatever it is, sitting with your little kitten on your lap or a puppy or, whatever, those moments are those pleasant distractions that you should put in your little toolbox, because they do help bring you to a much more mindful state, especially with with the work I do.
So let's talk about the work you do. Let's talk about holistic health. Let's talk about how did you, so you were in pain, you understood it was a chronic condition. What did you do? Like, what was your process? Like, okay, I need to, how did you help yourself? How did you get into holistic health and in this space? What brought you there?
Well, interestingly enough, this goes back a little again, because I was a child that actually was in pretty good shape and started to gain weight when my dad got sick. Food was my control. And I got heavier than a child should be at my age. And at that age, no child really should be thinking about going to diet centers and Weight Watchers and things like that, because you're still a kid growing. But what we need to do to get yourself on a healthier track before the relationship with food comes in, and it can be very detrimental. I actually wound up going to fat camp. We call it fat camp, but that's not the name of the camp. It actually was a camp in Pennsylvania that is still active to this day. Actually, in my day, it was called Camp Colang. I think it's called Pacantico Trails or something now, but still with the same owners and everything. But it was an opportunity for me to learn more about my relationship with food and how exercise matters and community matters. And from that, I really started building a healthier relationship with food, because I noticed how my dad's relationship with food was not healthy. And I think at some point I got a little obsessive about it, because I was always a little nervous, especially as a teenager. We're always obsessing about our weight, how we look, and I was always involved with fitness and sports and being more mindful of what I ate. Now, and I ate poorly as well, but I lost that weight and I was like, I am not gaining this back. No way, no day. So fast forward, I started to build a healthier relationship with food because of Camp Colang, and it was a Weight Watchers supported camp as well. I think it was supported by them. And then I realized that I had some traumas in my life that made me think deeper about just the relationship with food. And also I was getting ready for a pretty big event in my life, which was getting married at the time. And I wanted to look my best, as every bride does. And at the same time, I was also I was cast to be on a show called Daily Burn 365, which is a live streaming fitness show. It was the first of its kind. And this was a number of years ago. And I'm still on the show, actually. But being around community, the sense of community, and seeing how people support each other, it really opened my eyes. Like, I want to help people. I saw the community in the chats at Daily Burn, and I'm like, I want to help people on a grander level. And that is where I started looking into integrative nutrition, which, interestingly enough, as someone who does television work and has been on camera for so many years, this Institute for Integrative Nutrition actually hired me to be one of their online educators long before this came about, talking about Daily Burn. And I did a number of their modules for their curriculum, their online curriculum. So when I dove in and decided that I wanted to get certified as an integrative nutrition holistic health coach, I actually found myself watching videos that I was instructing. Talk about life being a full circle, right? So that was really, I remember sitting there when my first video came up. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is interesting, because I remember being at IIN when I was first doing videos with them, thinking, I'm going to come back here one day. I don't know how. I didn't even think about health coaching. And so it opened my eyes to the fact that there are hundreds of dietary theories out there. And it's not just about your nutrition, it's about your mindset. There's the primary and secondary wheel of our lives. The secondary is your nutrition. It's smaller. The primary is your home life, your faith, your community. All those things that make up that bigger wheel are more about the mindset. And by the way, they don't teach nutrition in medical school. So this is where there's such a strong appreciation and connection and collaboration between doctors, especially functional medicine and integrative health doctors, and health coaches, because this goes back to what I was saying about somebody who finds out that they're diabetic or they have high blood pressure and they have to change everything. A doctor will say, do this, change this, but they're not guiding you on that journey, right? So that's where working with someone who understands integrative nutrition can help you and support you. And then on top of that, I brought in havening because that was kind of a fluke. I don't know if you want to just go into that.
Let's go into it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So havening for me was, I already was a holistic health coach, and it was kind of a fluke. I was at a birthday party for a friend, and there was a mutual friend there who is the CEO of the havening organization. I had no idea what that was. And it was while I was walking out the door to leave that I met her, and it was like instant friendship. And she asked me what I did. And I was, I'm a health and wellness journalist. I'm also a health coach. And I said, what do you do? Because, those are those questions you ask, right? And she put her hands like delicately. We're already in close space. And, you have to be very mindful when you're touching other people. But our energies were just really good, where she put her hand on my arm and on my other arm. And she just started slightly havening me, which is a havening touch. And she asked if she could show me, first of all, without doing it. And she said, well, this is what I do. I'm in part of the havening organization. And it's a psychosensory approach that uses touch and pleasant distraction to alter your thoughts, moods, and behavior. And I'm like, Fee, I don't know what you're doing to me, but I want more of it. And she's like, well, that's great, because we're doing a weekend intensive if you're interested. I'm like, well, I'm always looking at new modalities to bring into my practice. And I went to the havening 2-day workshop with the Dr. Rudins. They're two twins out of New York. One's an internist and one is a dentist, believe it or not. And I went and I volunteered to be demoed on stage with Dr. Ron Rudin, who's the founder of havening. And I was havened on my father's death.
Wow.
And then during the 2-day workshop, I was also havened on my TMJ pain. The two big traumas in my life gone in a weekend. Because what havening has the ability to do is it puts your brain in what they call a delta wave state, which are slow moving brain waves. And it's the best way to describe it is almost like, and I think I've shared this with you before when we were first talking, it's almost like that jack in the box, right? So if you're passing an intersection, and every time you pass this intersection where you might have had a fender bender or an accident, your palms start sweating, your heart starts racing, and you just want to get through that thing as fast as humanly possible. So havening is almost like the jack in the box. Every time that jack in the box opens, we jump back, right? Our amygdala is fight or flight. It jumps. We want out of that situation. But what havening is, it's almost like, oh, here we go back. I never thought of this connection. It's the wire cutters. And it cuts that wire, the wire that I never got to use to cut my TMJ when I was going through TMJ. It's the wire cutters that are being used in the moment to cut the spring so that Jack isn't jumping out at you anymore. It still happened. Whatever it is in your life, the upsets that we have every day still occurred. The traumas that we have experienced still happened, but we have the ability to look at it differently. It's like CPR for the amygdala, is what we say. And we call the amygdala Amy in the world of havening, making her feminine, making it a nurturing, thinking of something nurturing we want to take care of. So with touch and pleasant distraction, you have the ability to alter your thoughts, moods, and behavior, put your brain in the delta wave state, release those happy chemicals, the serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, and do it rapidly and many times, as in my case, permanently. So it's an amazing modality, as you know, and I love talking about it and I love sharing it. So
we're working together. I've done havening with you for several times now, and I'm practicing it on my own. I don't think I would have the courage, having never tried it before, to do that on stage and deal and have those traumas exposed to all those people. So, courage, vulnerability, you obviously have that in spades. That's incredible. My experience with it, as we've worked through different things, yes, I want to lose weight. I want to get healthier. I have all these goals that I came to you with, but as we started going through, some different, let's say, lingering traumas or things about related to disability, related to, for example, I've always wanted to overachieve, right? It's like I have to prove that I'm worthy. I have to prove that I'm capable of participating in society, of being a valued member of it, of participating. Those traumas, I've worked through a lot of them, but for me, the when we work together in that space, it's a different form of meditation where it's like I can see the emotions and I can feel the emotions, but I'm not reacting to them. I'm kind of like looking at them from the outside and seeing them, and they're not triggering me anymore. They're there, and so that's how you move past the roadblock, right?
Yeah, I mean, powerful. I'm so glad to hear you share that, and it's just amazing. So yes, we're able to move past the upsets, because what we're doing is, as I love to say, we all have a story, right? Every single one of us on this planet has a story, many stories. Sometimes we are so fearful of going back to reliving those stories that we are living in that landscape of what things feel like then. Okay, because for something to be a trauma, it has to have four things. It has to have an event has to take place. There needs to be a feeling of inescapability. There needs to be a meaning to it, and there needs to be a landscape. And by landscape, what I mean is we're presenting the feeling. We're bringing back the feeling we had when it actually happened now, and we know that's not really what's happening now, right? But that's trauma. However, we can have upsets that are not traumas, and they're still very triggering and very upsetting. So if we have the ability to recognize our story and understand that our thoughts are powerful, we can change the narrative to how we handle them going forward. And my job is to keep my clients accountable. My job, and what I love doing, I don't even consider it really a job, is to mirror back to you what maybe at the moment you don't see in yourself, so that you have the tools. And you can put the tools to be in charge of your own emotional well-being in your own hands. For real, because you're using your hands in havening. It's 3 different approaches. It's, like you're washing your hands or giving yourself a nice hug and touching your arms, like what happened to me the first time, or your face, where there's a lot of nerves in your face. So it's very powerful. But those 3 ways to haven or self-haven, which is really great because you can self-haven yourself for the minor upsets, that paired with those pleasant distractions that we talked about earlier is where the magic happens. That's what I call brain candy, basically. It's one of the havening to me is another brain candy in my mental health toolbox, right? Because it's offering you the possibility to take control of your emotional well-being.
Absolutely. And I think it even, brain candies is a great way to describe it, but I would go I would take it even further than that. Like, it's deeper than that. It's, the emotional, we have an unconscious mind, we have a subconscious mind. Like, when things happen to us, A, we don't always have time to process it. B, those things linger with us when we don't. And so to be able to go back to them and to see them again and to feel them again, and then disconnect the emotion and see it and say, like, no, I want to go here instead. I want to do this instead. It's like it cuts the cycle of, for me, right? Like, I have issues with foods. Sometimes I've been in great shape, sometimes I haven't. I've been yo-yoing, right, my whole life, because I'm always putting something else first, whether it's my company, whether it's school. It's a number of things, but to be able to process those things again and look at them and say, like, no, this is what the issue is. I need to hold space for myself so I can be a better version. I can be what closer to what I want to be. Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's soul food as well. It's not just brain candy. It's something.
Yeah. I love that. It's soul food too. Oh, that's great. Definitely. When I call it brain candy, I just mean that we have these amazing happy chemicals that are released, like I mentioned, in the brain.
Absolutely.
These are the same chemicals we have when we work out, when we're swimming, or when we have that awesome dessert. Those feelings we get in the moment, right? Why don't we want to live in that space longer? Why do they only have to be temporary? So it's just offering that sweet reward in a way that we love, but it could be long-term. And the soul food is a wonderful way of putting it as well, because we have that power. And I don't think we give the brain enough credit. We're starting to talk about neuroscience more and more in the mainstream, to where we all have access to it. It's beautiful to see that, I got to be honest. And I got to be honest with you on this one too. I was never that girl that was into science classes. Okay. Now I'm like a neuro nerd and I love it, but not so much. I mean, when people come to me, a lot of times people are coming because they just want support and they want answers. They don't necessarily want to know all the neuroscience behind it. They just, what can help me heal? And I'm not a healer. I'm giving you the tools to heal yourself. You know, I've mentioned it before. It's like coming to Hilary's hardware store. You want hypnotherapy? Cool, I've got that. Oh, you want havening? Cool, I've got that. Oh, you want holistic integrative nutrition support? Got that too. Need a little help knowing how to use it? Sure, I'm doing a demo over here. I'll show you around, and yeah, you can come back weekly and we can talk about it, or once a month, whatever's comfortable to you. It's just me providing the tools for your mental health toolbox, and I just have the hardware store. You know.
Absolutely, and I love the work you're doing. I think it's invaluable. I think, when it's just impressive. And your ability to, again, you're very empathetic. You're a great problem solver. So I think that, you're just bringing some really powerful tools to the table to help people.
Thank you. Felt that. And it's a joy being here and, supporting you on your journey as well. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people like yourself that realize that they want to live powerfully, because we need to laugh through our lessons, and we all have lessons to learn. And if we just walk away with one tip and one tool that can make a positive change in our lives, and we're doing something right,
Absolutely. So I'm gonna ask you one more question that I ask everybody so far.
Oh boy.
What have I missed that you think is important to talk about that we have not discussed?
What have you missed?
Anything? Maybe we didn't, but
I'm going to say that nothing's been missed, because the most beautiful conversations are those which are organic. And maybe this is a good lead into the fact that we're fellow podcasters as well. I love that you're supporting mine. I support yours. So it's it's not a miss. It's almost like an introduction to just be able to say, I'm here to support people. And I do that through my own podcast as well. And there's so much space for so many unbelievable conversations to happen. And we need to keep having these conversations. You're holding space for people to learn more about disabilities. I'm holding space for people to learn more about mental health and laughing through the lessons, health, healing, and humor with Holistically Speaking. So I just want to thank you for holding that space for me. And if anyone wants further support, they certainly can get in touch with me. I'm sure you're going to share that on your podcast page as well.
So what are the best places for people to reach out to you?
Of course. So my website is hilaryrusso.com with one L, or Holistically Speaking. And just go there, and if you go under the healing tab, you'll see there's a space for havening, and I am offering complimentary discovery calls. So if people have questions about havening or holistic health coaching or any area that I work in, I am happy to support you and share my time to give you more information so that you can see if we align together, and I can help you on your emotional healing journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hilary. This was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Gustavo Serafini and the Enabled Disabled podcast. You can listen and subscribe to more inspiring episodes wherever your headphones take you. Just visit enableddisabled.com. And make sure you're not missing an episode of Holistically Speaking while you're at it by subscribing wherever you're listening right now. Consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts to let us know how we're doing. And you heard Gustavo and I talk a little bit about havening techniques during this episode. So if you're interested in learning more, reach out to me at hilaryrusso.com/havening or on social media at Hilary Russo. You have the power to put active emotional well-being back in your own hands, and I am happy to show you how. You can even try havening with me if you attend the Wellness Gala on November 14th in Whippany, New Jersey. It is a day filled with health, healing, and a little bit of Hilary. So really, how can you miss it? I'm sharing that link on the podcast page, so go ahead and grab your tickets before they're gone. And finally, if you know someone who may find this conversation valuable, consider passing it along. You never know how it might impact someone who needs a little extra support. Holistically Speaking is produced by Alan Seals with music by Lippo Renning and recorded on Squadcast. And if you're looking to start a podcast of your own, check out Squadcast. They have a great opportunity for you to give it a try. Thanks for listening. Be kind to your mind, and don't forget to laugh.